All set?
Yep, all set. Over to you.
Hi, my name's John Tarbox. Well, I'll get to it in a minute. And I'm going to talk to you tonight about APRS. And so we'll move along here. Just some of the presentation basics. The session is being recorded, as you know. It's be available for anyone in the public to watch. You can, if you have a question, a burning question, just type it in the chat window at any time. Steve will moderate. If I've done something stupid or something, tell us and we'll address it. And if it's urgent, we'll take it right in line. Otherwise, we'll catch it at the halftime or the end. And we'll answer questions at the intermission, give you a chance to, I have a bio break or whatever, and then at the end. And I want to give a big thank you for a couple of people who really helped me put this together. Lynn Diefenbach, KJ4ERJ, who's here. He helped me with these slides, as did Jeff Hochberg, K4JEW. And here's what I look like. I've been a ham since the 1960s. I'm currently an amateur extra. I've worked in the computer field all my life. I currently teach computer science in community college part-time. And I've been active with the Appalachian Trail Golden Packet since 2011, which is an annual APRS event we'll get to. And I have my Master's of Science in Computer Information Systems with a concentration in cybersecurity, and cybersecurity and ham radio are the two things that kind of hit my buttons. I also like to go sailing, so if any of those you want to talk about, you can hit me up afterwards. Tonight we're going to try to cover these following bullet points. Should be, when you finish tonight, you should understand, why does APRS exist? What does it do? How is it used? What are some of the key terms? How are you going to get started with APRS? How are you going to move on to more advanced things? Where's APRS going in the future? What is Golden Packet? And then we're going to do some Q&A. So this is just a history slide, sort of obligatory. And we've done a lot of things in ham radio. We've done CW, we've done voice, all kinds of different modulation techniques. When we only had CW, AM was a big deal. Then FM and single sideband. We've done RIDI, we've done packet, we've done fax, we've done slow scan TV, we've done fast scan TV. So the two things I ask you to take away from this is we've always been innovative and doing new things in ham radio. And the second thing is, if you think about, if you were trying to send a radiogram, somebody asked you to send a message like birthday wishes, they really wouldn't care what kind of net you put it on. They're going to fill out the form and it's going to get delivered. And the recipient isn't going to know whether you did it by AM or FM or CW. We have this idea, and particularly any of you computer people, of layers. In other words, in the internet, when you send email, you don't really care about what kind of cable went to you, whether it was DSL or Wi-Fi. So we have kind of a layering thing here too. We don't usually think about it in terms of ham radio, but I'd ask you to think about this, the innovation and some of the abstraction layers here. So let's talk about packet radio. Some of you may remember radio teletype. We got those big typewriters out of World War II, and they'd sit there and they were bulky. And what happened in the late 80s is everybody started getting into the internet or dial-up with bulletin boards. So you get an IBM PC and you could hook a modem to it and you could dial into the internet or AOL or whatever you were using. And so the packet radio said, well, gee, if we can do it, over the phone lines with analog signals, maybe we could take some of those same modems and hook them up to a radio and do it over a radio signal. So, and that's what they did. It started out of Vancouver, and then we have Tapper took that over out of Arizona. And that was their big thing back in the days. And a lot of hams ran bulletin board systems, and you would take your PC and you connect it to the radio, to the bulletin board system. Maybe your buddy left a message for you and you get it. It was email, or you could connect through to a second one because there was primitive networking here. And hams really pioneered all this stuff. And they'll tell you, like a lot of stuff that's done with cell phones was pioneered by hams. And what happened was when everybody got the internet, it was like, gee, to send an email to my buddy, I don't have to do it with WinLink. I can just go on the internet and do email. And so a lot of the bulletin board systems went off the air and the packet kind of waned, which is kind of a shame. And it's kind of taking a comeback in places because of emergency corporate communications, because we know the internet doesn't always stay up, like Hurricane Katrina and stuff like that. Okay, so what is APRS? APRS is Automatic Packet Reporting System. And the person who invented it was Bob Berhinga. There's his picture there. We're going to get to more about him in the next slide. Unfortunately, he's a silent key. He passed away last month. But what he said is, okay, we have this packet. It's like the internet. You can send anything. But what if we put a little structure over it and defined some communications things so that we could send it in a structured way? And that's what APRS is. It's a sits on top of packet radio. It uses the same kind of technology, but it sends it in a structured way. And the other thing it happened is it got built in a lot of radios. So here you see a Kenwood radio. Bob spent a lot of time working with Kenwood, and he said, let's just make it so you can get it on the display in the radio. You don't have to have a computer. You don't have to have a modem or a TNC. We'll just build it right into the radios. And this is a lot of what happened. But you can still use computers, obviously. Okay, so this is from the APRS website. The credits down the bottom. You can go look at it. Basically, it was started in 1982 when Bob wrote a data mapping program that plotted positions of naval ships. He was down at the Naval Academy, and he used an Apple II for that. And then he moved on and he got what he called a connectionless emergency traffic system, passing messages. He wrote that on a VIC-20 and a Commodore 64. Some of you remember those. And to do structured communications over packet. And they did it in support of an endurance race. So, as the people come through and the bib numbers at station 26, instead of doing that, in voice, it could be done in a digital way, an automated way. And then he ported it to the IBM PC. This is just logical. What everybody was doing is we get better computers that got ported over. And it got the name APRS in 1992. In North America, the frequency we generally use on 2 meters is 144.39. If you turn your FM radio there, you'll hear these, what digital signals probably are because we use them on HF in a lot of places. But you'll hear the blurps of the traffic, the packet signals, and that's if you get on that frequency and you hear it, you know what it is. It's APRS. It's also been linked into the internet, which was not part of the original system. And finally, one of the keynote events for testing, sort of like field day for APRS, is the Appalachian Trail Golden Packet, ATGP, which we do every year. And it's all on the high peaks of the Appalachian Mountains. And we'll get to more of that later as well. And here's the link if you want to go read that on the ARRL website. Okay, as you go through this presentation, my slides have this plain white background. If you see a slide that has a blue background, it was contributed by Lim Diefenbach, KJ4ERJ. He's the author of the popular APRS IS32 software for APRS. Some of you may use that. Here on this wiki.com, you can see all his presentations. That's where the blue slides came from. And he's been writing the software, and he's been around this longer than I have. And he's available for questions. He's one of the participants here tonight. So think of it like Stump the Chumps on Car Talk on public radio. If you ask a tough question that stumps me about the software, we'll kick it over to Lynn and be like click and clack. Okay. So this is one of Lynn's slides. It has the blue background. What is APRS? Okay, it's a tactical real-time information sharing system using standard protocols. What does that mean? It leverages packet radio, the standard. In fact, the communication standard on radio is AX.25, which led to X.25, which is an internet standard used in other places. So it was a standard contributed by ham radio. And it allows different people at different stations to share information in a standard format via digital radio. It was developed by Bob Berhinga. It's supported by several major radio manufacturers. Kenwood sort of had the lead, but you can buy Yaesu radios that have APRS built in, Alinco, and some others we'll get to later. It's useful both for emergency operations and standard day-to-day operations. And it's an example of basically, you can think of it as the internet over RF. Okay, he goes into a lot of detail here. I'm going to skip over a lot of the details. This is not meant to be teaching you everything you need to know to go write your own program. To give you an overview, AX.25 is the link layer protocol that says, you know, how the ones and zeros get encoded and sent through the internet, and how the, you know, the parity bits get thrown on there and whatnot. That's a codified internet standard. If you run Linux, AX25 software is generally included in the kernel of most Linux systems now. So it's become a standard. It does, it connects similar to TCP/IP. If you're a unit, if an internet guy, you're familiar with TCP, which is connect address package, UDP. I'm not going to get into all that detail. We do something similar here. Now, the way you get identified on the internet is, you know, you have like an IP address or a MAC address. On ham radio and APRS, you have a station ID, which is your call sign, and followed by a secondary station identifier. So mine might be like WA1KLI -5 or -8. So everybody can have 16 stations on the air simultaneously. It's your call sign followed by a number 0 to 15. And don't confuse that with what's done on Wi-Fi for service set identifiers, completely different. It puts a checksum in each packet so the receiving station can see if it got a corrupted packet or a valid packet. But in the basic system of AX.25, there's no error correction. But there are other protocols used with APRS that do allow error correction. So you send this packet out, and it can get you saying who it's coming from, who it's going to, and there can be repeaters. So the first station that gets it might look at that and says, it's not for me, it's for somebody else. So I'll retransmit it. And just like we have voice repeaters, except that being in real time, it stores it and then retransmits. So it's store and forward. We'll get to that. Okay, we're not going to spend much time on this slide. This is what it looks like under the coverage. On the bottom is samples of all these packets. Understand there's defined formats here. Generally, you have things like a coordinates in there. You might have telemetry data, like if it were a weather station, might say the temperature, the wind speed, the wind direction. There are different predefined formats depending on what's being sent. And you can go look these all up. And generally, 2 meters, we use 1200 baud. The tones are 1200 hertz and 2200 hertz. So it's just like the old modems that, you know, when it beeps and blops when you listen to it. Takes the digital information, converts it to audio tones, and then converts them back to digital on the other end. It's frequency shift keying, so that's why it works on your FM radios on 2 meters. It can do it over other things like PSK 61 over Whisper. You can do other things. SCS trackers, they kind of promoted robust packet with error correction. People have done different enhancements on it, but the basic thing is 1200 baud on 2 meters, 144.39. That's your lowest common denominator that everybody interacts with. So let's, what do we have? What kind of stations? We have digipeaters. That's a station that's, and virtually every station is capable of it being a digipeater. So I don't want you to think the radio in your car is somehow built different than the digipeater. It's simply you turn on the mode to say your radio is allowed to do it. And when it receives a packet, if it's not for him, it retransmits it. And that's how you can have a small walkie-talkie cover a big area, because you may have a digipeater on a hill that picks up the weak signal, puts it out at high power, and a lot more people can get it. It works in fixed stations and mobile stations. One thing to notice here, which is kind of interesting, if you're used to the range of your FM radio, you find, your 50-watt radio, I don't know, goes 20 miles. Generally, APRS, because of the way it's encoded, will go about half the distance. It won't go as far as a regular voice FM signal. So it's something to be aware of. In the digipeating, it tries to detect duplicates, so it doesn't send, just keep sending the same packet over and over. Like A sends it to B, who sends it out, who picks it up by A and sends it again. And there's a side note there. A couple of Kenwood radios have an issue with that. There's some issues around UI flood and UI trace. We're not going to go into those here tonight. Okay, so let's look at the next thing we did. Is these radios were all working as a full RF network, and somebody said, gee, what if I connected my radio to the internet? And this is so like DMR, you could go on your DMR radio, can have a gateway through the internet, so you could talk to somebody in Australia who's on DMR. We did the same thing was done here first. So you could have a radio, and remember, it's digital, it's not voice. So I could send a message from my radio. It gets picked up by somebody that's connected to the internet, goes to the internet. If my packet is addressed to somebody in England, it gets routed over there and gets sent out over radio in England, and they get the message on their handheld. So, that's great when the internet's up. But if the internet goes down, the RF portion's still working. And it feeds all over the world. And the other thing, there's machines on the internet that collect all these packets. So when you send it, when your iGate sends it to the internet, it's collected up so different servers can get it. And think of it sort of like the WinLink system. And we're not going to go into the technical details here. We'll save that for another night. Okay, here's a lot of resources on the web where you can go learn more about this, the APRS specifications, a lot more user-friendly stuff, data archiving site where they'll have historical packets. So if you want to find out, you sent a packet last week and you want to you can go get it there. And the wiki sites. So just some resources for you. Incidentally, we're going to make this slideshow available to you. It's going to get uploaded to your club website after the show here tonight. So what do you need to get on the air? Well, you either need an APRS compatible radio. So let's say you have one like the Kenwood D710, you just take it out of the box. Well, you're going to go into the menus like you'd program anything else, and you're going to need to put your call sign in there and a number between 0 and 15 for your SSID, and you're going to need to put in a path. So in my case, one of my radios is WA1KLI-15. And if you don't know what you're doing, just put -0 and don't worry about it. But it doesn't matter. It can be any of those numbers. The path, we can talk about that. Basically says, when you send it out, how many other stations do you want to retransmit it? You might say, I don't want anybody to retransmit it. Or you might say, if you're really in the boonies, you might say, I want 3 people to retransmit it. But if you're in a very congested area, you don't want hundreds of stations retransmitting it. And this number 2 is not the number retransmitting it, but the number putting it out on the second hop. So you put it out, if 8 stations hear you, 8 are going to send it out on the next hop. And if you've asked for 2 hops, those 8 stations might reach 50 stations who then do the second hop. So it might be picked up by literally hundreds of stations. That's why you don't want it going 8 or 10 hops. And in the US, our primary frequency is 144.39, but you're not limited to that. If you want to test with your buddy or something, you can use other frequencies. Okay, here's the recommended SSIDs. You can use for like a weather stations, they typically use -13. A handheld might be -7. Balloon launches use like -11. But like I said, if you pick the wrong one, it's still going to work. And the pathing, this goes, you can say like, don't retreat, transmit, but generally the common one would be wide 1-1, wide 2-1. And you can go read about this. I'm not going to go into details on that. Okay, so let's look at what happens here. If we look at this little map, we see here there's a blue van down the bottom, and he sends out a message, and it's picked up by the green Jeep and these two green stars, which are digipeaters. And one of them up top got his packet, and he sends it out, and the house on the right got what was retransmitted, and the car on the left was retransmitted. But he also sent it out to the internet gateway, that black diamond with the G. So that digipeater got the packet from the blue van and sent it out a bunch of places. Now, if that same red car in the upper left, he got the packet from the digipeater. So let's say he says, oh, my buddy in the blue van's on the air. He could send a message back. It would go to the digipeater and come back to the blue van, presumably assuming, the path is reciprocal, that the propagation in one direction is as good as the other. Some people can communicate directly, presumably like the blue van could talk directly to the green Jeep. They wouldn't need to go through the digipeater. But if you need the digipeater, it's there, it goes through multiple hops, and there's logic built in there so that, in other words, if it came down that path on the upper left to that red car, and that would be on the second hop. And if you said only give me 2 hops, he wouldn't retransmit it to the third. Well, in this case, he is retransmitting it to the third car on the left, but you can control how many hops it goes over.
So John, maybe just for me to chime in, the key takeaway here is there's lots of redundancy and lots of resiliency when it comes to APRS. Would you pretty much use those 2 words to, more simply describe this nice little, red and blue and green chart?
I would, if you're in a urban or suburban area where there's a lot of activity. Now, obviously, if you're in the North Woods of Canada, you might be lucky if you just hit a digipeater, right? So it depends, but it's built for redundancy. And so, yes, if let's say that green digipeater at the top went off, well, he's the only one connected to the internet. But if he went offline, he went down because got a lightning strike. Well, that blue van also sent to the digipeater on the left, which would send it back to the red car. So yes, there's redundancy, resiliency here. People can come and go, and it's a self-healing network. Does that help, Steve?
Absolutely. Great.
Okay. Do we have a lot of IT people in the group here, Steve?
We definitely do, and we're getting close to that kind of halfway point. So I'm sure there'll be some good basic questions before you get into maybe more of the deeper dive. I think that's 2 slides from now. So sure. I think we're right on target.
Great. So somebody said, gee, let's connect this to the internet. So that's an iGate, and anybody can operate an iGate. If you can hook your radio to a computer and the internet, you can run an iGate. It can either be one way or 2-way. In other words, you could just collect stuff from RF and send it out to the internet, collect stuff from the internet, send it out to RF, but it's recommended you do 2 ways. So let's say somebody's driving his car and wants to send a message to a guy in England. You receive that, send it to the internet, to England, and the response comes back, you send it out to the guy in the car. And there's sites on the internet like aprs.fi that collect all this data and draw maps. And there's other kinds of servers on the internet. And if you want to find out about this is the website, aprsis.net. And it's really easy to set up an iGate. Okay, do you want to break at this point?
Yeah, let's definitely use this as a good time to break. So if anyone has any questions, it would be easier if you want to type them into chat, or if you have a slightly more complicated, if you just want to type in that you have a question with a very brief summary, I'll say let's take 3 to 5 questions, and then we'll carry on with some really good aha moment type of applications for APRS. So again, if you have a question, go ahead, type it into the chat, and we'll go from there. All right, so while I see a couple people typing in here, maybe let me start us off here and ask a question. So what you're seeing on your slide right now is a website called APRS-FI. Do you want to describe, John,
Sure.
what are we actually looking at? You know, there's call signs, we see the
Sure.
SSIDs, we see the icons. You know, what exactly are we seeing here in terms
Sure,
of
Steve.
this
I'll
map?
move ahead of a couple of slides, and maybe at that point you'll have questions. Okay. Any of you guys are familiar with the reverse beacon network? Somebody said, gee, I could build a radio that listens to CW traffic, and when I hear something, I'll log it and you can see it on the internet. So, you know, if you send a test message on CW, you can go to the website and see if you got heard by any of the people in the reverse beacon network. Well, somebody said, let's do the same thing for APRS. Since we can collect all these beacons, and generally the beacons have the call sign and the position, we can put it up on a map and show where people are. So that's website is aprs.fi. You can go there, and it's the kind of stuff you expect on the website. You could set a geographic region. You can filter by call sign. Anyway, I went on yesterday. I'm in Maine. This is part of the coast of Maine. So if we look here, you see a couple of things. In the upper left, you see a couple of houses. You can code your radio. You can say what symbol you want to use to so people can tell what kind of station you're on. There's a couple of houses up there. On the far right, you see WX, and on the middle left, you see XX. Those are weather stations. People often go get, I forget who it is that makes the, is it La Crosse or LaGrange or something, makes weather stations. And oftentimes they'll get those, and lots of people don't even use the radio, it's connected to the internet and report out weather conditions there. And that's very helpful for like the Weather Bureau. It's being used with the Skywarn system, or people that just want to know local weather conditions around the country. There are a lot of these weather stations using APRS. But if you look about halfway down, about 2/3 to the right, you'll see that's a little breadcrumbs. They're behind W1 MLC-9 with the car symbol. He's driving in his car, and it shows you where he's been. And each of the dots on that is where it actually received a beacon from him. And generally, he's probably doing smart beaconing. So every time he turns the corner, the radio senses that, oh, you've changed the corner, I'll send a position report. When he's driving on a long straight stretch, it may only send it every 15 minutes or something. It's called smart beaconing. But there he is, and you can see he's driving in his car. And if you were to click on his car, this is not live on the slide. I'm going to go to the next slide. Let's see. There he is. You see his little car. If you were to click on it on the website, you will see it's the date and time. It'll show you the speed, his heading, and the information. You can put a status message into your radio, and you can see he's telling us he has a FTM 400 XDR radio. He's driving a gray Passat TDI. It tells us his station, his signal was received via the path there, W1EMA-1. He had set his path passing to wide 1, wide 2-1, and it was also picked up by KB1, KBU. So you can see, in other words, if you were interested in propagation conditions at that point, you could see who picked him up. And that's a quick summary for him. But at the top, you see I could center my screen to him, I could zoom in, but also there's an info button there. If I were to click on that info, I get the next screen. And this may be a little hard to read. I apologize. The type is small, but this is telling me about that station, W1 MLC-9. It gives me his comment, his location, tells me that location, for instance, is 1.8 miles west, bearing 251 from Thomaston, which is a town. So I can, see where he is. Tells me the last position before that was 35 minutes, 37 seconds ago. Gives me the local times, course and speed again, his device, the pathing. It tells me there are an APRS-FI, they've stored 1,065 positions for this guy. He tends to send a packet on average every 336 seconds during the latest period, which is 4,370 seconds long. I don't know how long that says. His other SSID has 1-10, so that may be his laptop. And then finally down below, and this is cut off, it shows all the stations that have heard him. So you can see who's hearing him. And so you can get, if you're on, you can get a lot. If you were just look yourself up, you can get a lot of detail about you and see how your station's performing. Have we got any questions yet, Steve?
So I think we're gonna probably move on. I think there's just so much great information. I know from the audience, there's a lot of people that are really super in depth on APRS already, and they're gonna probably be more interested in the back half of this. There's others that may be new to APRS, and we may have made their heads explode as we've got to this point. But before we kind of get into this slide, which I think is gonna showcase that this is not just a send and receive your location and see people on a map. That was something that Bob WB4APR was very, very focused on dispelling. It's not just for sharing information about location. You can do many other things, as John's going to talk about next. But do you want to just maybe talk for a minute about if somebody wanted to get interested right now today in APRS, and I know you have another slide on this a little bit later, but if somebody said right now today, they're interested in doing something with APRS, you made it sound simple. You said that there's a lot of radios out there. If somebody wanted to get going today compared to, let's say, DMR, how simple is it for somebody to go and buy a radio and be up and running with APRS and sharing their position or text messages, say, just compared to DMR, John? Like what's the level of simplicity there of like from box to on the air,
Sure.
comparing the two things? Then they're very, very totally different things, right? DMR and APRS, totally different. But what's the level of from box to doing it, would you say?
Sure, Steve. Well, first thing is, let's say I'm a 2-meter ham and I've got, my car rig and my handheld. They're all analog FM. And I say, I want to do DMR. I'm going to have to go buy a DMR radio. There's really no way to retrofit my old analog FM radio for DMR. I got to go buy a radio. But let's say I want to get my feet wet in APRS. In other words, I'm not trying to have the greatest station on the planet or high power. I just want to try it out cheap and see if it works. I'd be willing to bet probably 90% of the people in your club already have a biofang, right?
Absolutely. So
if I have a biofang, I can go on to like Amazon or anywhere else and buy the interface cable that plugs into the side of the biofang and plugs into a smartphone. And that cable is about $15, $20. So if I have an old biofang and I have an old Android smartphone, I can take that old phone and my biofang and a $20 cable, connect them up, get a free piece of software called APRS Droid, and I'm on the air with APRS. It's that simple.
Excellent. So for anyone that may have missed that, very inexpensive, $15, $20. You buy a cable. If you already have an inexpensive Baofeng radio, $25, $30 that you no longer use, free piece of software. You can get on, you can exchange messages, you can share location because your cell phone already has a built-in GPS, but you can do so many other things beyond that. And I think that acts as a really great segue into this. But before we do that, let's take one more shot. And again, we can take questions in line. So if anyone wants to type something at the chat, I can come back to you. But maybe let's just give the audience a moment. Again, sometimes it's hard. I think people are probably scratching their heads, but maybe let's just give it a minute for you to take a drink of water, John, and come up for air.
If I could mention one other thing, Steve. Some of you, well, I remember, I'm not going to make the assumption anyone else is as old as I am, but some of you may remember when you had keypads on cell phones and you wanted to send a text message and you wanted to send a letter B, where you had to take the, what was it, number 2 and press it twice, because A, B, and C were all on the same key. So you press 2 to get a B. And then if you wanted an O, you go to the 6 key and press it 3 times. And you want an A, you press the 2 key once. And it was painful to send messages. And a lot of these handhelds that have sort of this built-in messaging, they traditionally did this on this 20-year-old radio. But when you hook it up to like a smartphone or a tablet or a computer, now you have a rich interface where you just use your keyboard and type the message, or it makes the messaging and some of the stuff so much easier.
Absolutely great. All right, so maybe you know, kind of run through here and just keeping an eye on time. We're at 7:45. I think we'll probably come up right towards the end at about 8:05, 8:06-ish. But I think we're right on track. And towards the end, John will be putting all this together around the Appalachian Trail Golden Packet thing. And I think that'll help this all click for a lot of folks. So if you want to continue onward, John, back to you.
Sure. So we know we can send messages over RF. We can make special messages. So if you have something like a weather station, you can define a special message. You can come up with more special messages to send to the things. So let's say you're out at a foot race or bicycle race, and you're at a check station. You want to send in as people come through the check station. A lot of these people on their bibs now, they'll put an RFID tag, now have a reader, and it can be automatic into a computer. And you could then transmit that back to the central station over APRS automatically, and it log all the bid numbers. And you could have it come up on the map at the central station so they can know where everybody is. There's lots of reasons you'd like to do this. And since you can do with simple things like a biofang, if there's an emergency or a flood, you know, you don't have to bring $10,000 worth of gear, or, you know, this your ecom van, you can get up on the air in an emergency location quickly. But with the gateways to the internet, here's some of the ones people have done. If any of you people do summits on the air, when you get up to the summit, you have to make like 10 contacts to get credit for it. And so you want to let people know you're there and looking for contacts. So you could, there's an application on a smartphone where you can do that. You can log into send a text message. You can get onto a website and log in. But if you're on a summit where there's no coverage, how are you going to let people know you're on the air for SOTA? Well, you can use APRS and send a message. So you send it in a certain format. It goes through, gets picked up the gateway, and it goes out to people, the SOTA site, and they know you're activating. Similarly, there's SMS gate to send and receive SMS messages to cell phones. You can send and receive email to the regular internet session. And there's another one, sat serve. So you can get satellite pass information, because for instance, they have APRS on the International Space Station. You can communicate to them via APRS. So I will go through these quickly. If you want, if you're doing a SOTA person, here's where it is. You send the message, you address it's a tactical call sign. You send it to SOTA or APRS to SOTA, either one, and you tell it which summit you're on. The summits have numbers and the mode you're operating on and your frequency. So here's some examples here. And so, you know, like the first guy, he's on Mountain ON-010. He's on this frequency. He's on single sideband. And the comment is he's calling now. So here's some sample with things, and that goes to the SOTA website, so people know you're there and they'll give you a call. SMS gate, you know, you take your radio, you send the text message, gets picked up by one of the distributors thrown on the internet. Like I said, it could go to England, Australia, or anywhere. Oh, and incidentally, the APRS IS system keeps track of where your call sign was last heard. It's sort of like a cell phone. So it's going to send it to a gateway near to where you were last heard, and it may send it to multiple gateways. And then it will come out and you'll get, on this one would come to the cell phone, or similarly coming back would come to your radio. So you can communicate to someone who's not a ham. And the way you do it is, if you look at the bottom, you see add cell phone number and the message. It's that simple. And
so John, if I could, If I could jump in quickly, just because I think this is a great spot to do this. So one of the questions via chat from John KD2UI, his question has to do with what would it be an emergency situation to use APRS in? And so let me kind of frame it. So where John and most of the OMARC membership lives is in a region called the Catskills of New York. And there are amazing wilderness areas that unfortunately do not have either all the time throughout the year reliable cell phone coverage, or especially during winter months, or even just recently as of last night due to a high windstorm, power gets knocked out. And so let's say, for example, if John or somebody else is living in a, not that far from civilization, but in an area that has weather disruptions, how would he be able to use us? Again, thinking no cell phone coverage, now he's out of power, but he does have a charged up powered Baofeng radio and a smartphone that's useless, right? Because it has no cell phone coverage, but he has the magic cable to connect the two together. If he wanted to relay a message to somebody to say he's okay, sending that instead of over a voice repeater, which might not have people listening, APRS is great. And so what would be the clear use case for him? Or maybe I even gave it away in the setup there, but you know, how would you say he would be able to get a message to loved ones to let people know that he's okay?
Well, first off, presumably before he went out hiking the Catskills, he told his wife or somebody in his family where he was going and what time he was expected back, right? And so, you know, he's out there, he's delayed. So he doesn't want them, he wants them to know what's going on. So he'd send a message to his wife that would show up on it. Presumably her cell phone is in a place where there is coverage.
Or maybe if she has a radio at home.
Sure. If she was listening on APRS, he could send it to her call sign. That's assuming she's a radio amateur. But the more general cases, you just want to send it to a friend who knows nothing about ham radio and say, hey, I'm stuck up here. I got my foot stuck. Send help. I broke my arm. Whatever. Or it's raining, so I'm taking shelter and I'll be home 2 hours late. Well, you just want some message to the person who's, you know, sort of keeping your flight plan for that day, and you just send it to their phone number. It's that simple. The other thing you could do here is, let's say you were hiking in a place where the coverage was really bad. It's just like some people do in their car where they have a crossband repeater on their mobile radio. So they set that up, and so they take their handheld and do it for voice to their car radio, which retransmits it. If you knew you were in a place with dicey coverage and you had an APRS capable radio like this 710 in your car, you'd leave that running. And then when you went out, you'd send it from your little handheld. Your car would hear it, retransmit it at high power. And it would, you know, and before you left your car, you could verify you had coverage. And then you'd have a high degree of certainty it'd go through. And incidentally, with SMS gateway, you can send it in a way you get a confirmation message back that it was delivered.
Excellent. Very good. I think maybe just kind of to expand upon it, which I know there's a few people on here tonight that have had this exact same situation happen. When you configure a radio, let's say, for example, if you're driving and somebody sends you a text message because they can see that you're driving, or they can see that your packet, let's say you're 10 miles away, and you want to send them a message and say, hey, John, do you want to meet for lunch? I see you're 10 miles away. Well, as we know, some radios, you see a message and then it disappears right off immediately. So what would be a way to solve that? Because you can't be texting and driving. Are there any functions within radios that can automate some of those responses?
Well, for instance, I hate to recommend go get the Premier radio, because a Kenwood D710 GA now is like $700 if you can find one. But if both of them have one of these radios, if you and I are driving, and let's say I get a message from your radio because it's beaconing continuously, and it says, oh, Steve is driving in the car and I see he's 5 miles away. In addition, it says Steve is monitoring this frequency, because it's a dual RF unit. And so I can hit one button on my radio and it calls you on the frequency you're listening on. And I say, hey, Steve, it's me. And you just hear that coming out the speaker. But that's a function of a radio that has all that sophistication in it. If the guy has a biofang hooked up to his cell phone, it's not going to do that. So I don't want to tell everybody go buy a $700 radio. I don't know. Does that help at all?
It is. And even with the application APRS Droid, when you connect that to an inexpensive Baofeng with the cable, and we'll share some links to where people can get that on Amazon or wherever else, that application, as well as some of the radios that John speaks of, there's an auto reply function. And so you can even set it, again, in the example where if you're driving, you can have it automatically respond to somebody with a message of your choice, such as, I'm driving and I'm trying to be safe. I'll talk to you later, or something. And so when somebody addresses you a message, you can have your radio automatically respond. Now, explaining that while somebody is moving and, doing it that way, that's an easy one. But maybe looping back to John's original question, let's say if he's out somewhere and he has a radio at home that his wife, who may have an amateur radio license, could monitor. If she's away from the radio, technically, if he sends a message, that home radio can then respond back and say, received message. And so this way, at least there's a basic handshake. Right, John? So, there is a good.
And then if you're out there, broke my leg, need help, you'd expect your wife to respond. So, she's in the other room and she comes back 15 minutes later, sees the message. She's going to send the message back.
Yep. So hopefully, John, KD2UUI, that gives you some idea. And, there's a lot of folks locally, that we can connect you with that can go deeper. And the goal of this presentation was not to do the solve all end all, because I think this is a complex subject. Even Bob, who dreamt up this APRS stuff, even he would have a struggle to try to compress everything that you need to know to get started about APRS. But hopefully this is, kind of making some people say, aha, that sounds like an interesting thing. You can get started cheap. You can do lots of different things with it. And so I think if you want to carry on, John, and jump back in here, and then I think we get pretty close to golden packet, and then maybe take some questions right towards the end.
Well, the kind of takeaway from this slide is initially we had this system of radios. You could message the radios, and somebody said, gee, wouldn't it be great if I could send a message to somebody who's not a ham who has a cell phone? So they built this on top of it, and you can send messages to and from cell phones. The next one is, this is how your wife, if she had a cell phone, would send it back to you. She'd say, text it to this to a particular phone number, and she'd give @ your call sign with your SSID and the message. So, generally in the general public, it's easy enough. They can send you a message from a cell phone. Email. We have the ability to do this with email. So you send the APRS message to tactical call sign email, and then you start out quote marks, email at whatever the address is, and the quote marks, and then the body of your email. And it's you're limited to 67 characters, but you can send an email and they can send emails back to you. So, some hams said, wouldn't it be great if we could do email? And they got together, did it, right? So I'm hoping what you guys are thinking is, gee, I have a great idea. Yeah, you can do something new. Here's how, just as another one, and I'm not going to go into details, but if you want to know satellite passes, let's say you're out in the field and you're setting it up and you want to work satellite and you want to know satellite passes, there's a service for that. You send in a message, comes back. There's another one. Whether the voice repeater is close to me, send it to a certain address, it comes back and tells you. So there's been a lot of stuff done here. What else can you do with APRS? You can do weather stations. We talked about those a little bit. Balloon tracking. Generally, if you a lot of these people, they send up balloons and they go around the world 3-4 times, or maybe they crash. You want to track your balloon. You can take, there are firms that make tiny little APRS trackers. They're dedicated, little circuit board. You put it on your balloon, and you can watch on APRS FI and see where your balloon is and track it. And you can make your own service system. So Lynn, for instance, pointed out to me today, he has KJ4ERIJ-E1. You send it to that, it tells you the air conditioner vent temperatures, and another one that monitors refrigerator and freezers. So if that's something you'd like to do, hit Lynn up and he probably will tell you how he did the code and whatnot. And it's not rocket science. You could build it to monitor like Internet of Things, anything you're trying to monitor. Your game camera saw something, wants to send you a message. APRS, perfect. Because, you know, it goes a lot farther than Wi-Fi. And let's see, what do you need for equipment? You can buy a radio that has APRS built in, like the Kenwoods do that. They're getting hard to get. Some of the Yaesus have that. An APRS radio tends to cost more than the Biofang, but you know, a DMR radio costs more than the simple Biofang. I understand the Anytone AT D878 UV 2 Plus they're working on upgrading its firmware so we can do APRS messaging. Not all Anytone radios are the same. So if you're going to buy one of those, you know, be very leery. Some will, you know, only transmit and not receive. So don't think all are the same. You have to Spire be well, so check it out. And then the launch radio out of China, which Steve, and I know some of you guys have the HD UV 98, you know, plus or minus $150. It has APRS built into it. And so those are some of your choices. Like I said, plus our trusty Biofang. And it's, if you have a standard radio, let's say you have an old radio, a lot of them used to have those round DIN connectors on the back to put your audio in and out. If you get an interface, like an audio card or signal link or something like that, and a computer, then you can use some software. There's lots of software, like on the Raspberry Pi, DigiPi, Build-A-Pi, Ecom tools, on the Android phones, APRS Droid, APRS IS32 for Windows. There's another one for Macs, forget what it's called, but there's a bunch of software. You can try that. Most of these are, I think everything on this list is free. And so that you hook that through an interface to the audio on your radio, and you're going with a regular old radio. And lots of times 2-meter FM radios are, you can pick those up at Hamfest cheap, you know, a 40, 50 watt radio. It's going to do it built like a tank, and it'll do a great job. Okay, let's see. Steve, you can maybe chime in a little bit on this, but I understand your club's going to have like a hand-on session on the 19th.
Yes, so it's almost like we planned this for everyone, right? So John gave the fantastic infomercial. So I think the takeaway here is lots of complex stuff. You cannot do something like this justice through slides. You have to do a lot of this in person and see what's going on and hold it and play with it and see what people are doing. And so on the 19th at Turkey Hill State Forest in Saugerties, New York, there will be a in-person hands-on demonstration through a group called the Ulster and Northern Duchess Readiness Group. And the goal of that is kind of threefold. One of which is to demonstrate field communications by showing various quick to deploy VHF antennas that will give greater range than just your standard, you know, rubber duck on your radio. So we'll be showing how that works. We'll be also doing what's called parks on the air and showing people how they can set up an HF radio in the field and make contact. And as part of both of those, we will also be demonstrating APRS. And so everything that John went through, we're pretty much going to hit on all of these. So for example, having two radios, we can see how far apart, what our bearings are from another. So as we're walking around, we can see that. We can send messages, we can send other data back and forth. If people want to send things back and forth through a local digipeater or iGateway, so this way it routes out to like send a text message to your cell phone, since we should have cell phone coverage there. We'll do that. So pretty much everything just to see this in action in person, that's what we're going to be doing. So if anyone wants further details, I'll post the link in the follow-up on the chat. But if you go to www.under-group.com, we have the details there. So if anyone wants to come by that and check it out, everyone's more than welcome. Or if you're not local and you want to drive, it's a nice time of the year to get out and visit the Catskills. So that's what's coming up. I'll paste the details into chat and people can go and check that out afterwards.
Great. Let's do the Appalachian Trail real quick and then we'll get to questions. If you look on the right, you see these 15 mountains all the way from Katahdin Mountain in Maine down to Springer Mountain in Georgia. We've been doing this since 2009. We put people on every mountain. And the idea is number 1 sends a message and it goes all the way up to number 15, and number 15 sends a message and it goes all the way down. And generally the person on each mountain can hear the 2 stations adjacent to them, but obviously he's not. Number 1 isn't hearing 15 directly. It needs to get relayed. And the idea behind this was initially it says, well, suppose we had a regional emergency, say like, I don't know, the power grid was out in the Northeast or something. We need to get traffic out of the Northeast, but the rest of the country was up and running with the internet. They were fine. So I need to get a message out of Maine, maybe to like to New York State. If I sent people out in the field and set up like, like temporary repeaters, could we move that message with APRS? That was the test. We've been doing it. And yes, we got our first successful things in 2014. We go and do that each year. And we've done things like we do 9,600 baud as well, not just 1,200 baud. We pick a different frequency just for this test. Third Thursday of July each year. This is like sort of our field day for APRS, if you will. And
so kind of the exciting thing on there, sorry to jump in, John, is if everyone goes to that website, AT Golden Packet, what you're going to see if you're in the Hudson Valley, and if you're looking at that map, you're thinking, oh, it looks like 10, 11, 12, those are in our home area. So for example, in Ulster County is Sam's Point. That is one of the stations on the path for this event. And so I'm registered to be part of that. And I'd be really, really excited to get some others to come out and support it. So with that, I'll send it back to you, John, but I just wanted to get that brief little plug into that. This is relevant because it's in our area.
Right. So it's every year, it's the third Saturday of July. Now, what we have done traditionally in the past is we didn't want to have interoperability problems between like, Kenwood and Yesu, right? So everybody, with the exception of Mount Katahdin, took a Kenwood D710 radio up because we knew they should talk to each other. And Katahdin, you have to hike up in Maine. And we have one guy, Tim, he hikes up every year and gets there the night before and camps. He's our real trooper that hikes the mountain. I drive up Mount Washington. And so this year, we want to test more because Kenwood is discontinuing many of their radios. One of their plants burned. We said we can't count on Kenwood radios. We need to have more solutions. So what we're going to do is 2 parts. We're going to take our traditional Kenwood radios, do the regular test, and then we'll say, okay, that's done. And we're building new hardware for Raspberry Pis this year and other radios. And so we're going to say, at a certain point, flip over and try the new hardware, see if it works in interoperability. So that's where we're going to do that. We want to involve more hams, both on and off the mountains. So we would love to have more hams. In the past years, oftentimes we were lucky to get 1 ham up there. So we, if we get more hams out, like at Sam's Point, you can learn what we're doing. One guy can be like setting up the antenna while the other guy's doing something else. Or if it's a place where the public comes by, one guy could pass out brochures, all your usual field day stuff. Yeah. And then we want to promote APRS and encourage experimentation. And one of the things we want to do is we're planning, and we haven't finalized it yet, we want to have a sort of like a listener event. So if you're not on the mountain, but you can listen and capture the packets and report them, and we'll like give certificates out to people just to encourage participation. So we want that kind of participation event, even if you can't climb the mountain. So here's where you could reach out to Steve, because like he said he's doing Sands Point, and we have a website for it now where there'll be more details, Pat, posted. And that's it for the golden packet. So I think we're ready for questions.
Excellent. And again, John, thank you so much for a great presentation. The slides for this will be made available as well as the replay for those that joined late. Maybe just a quick info plug before we queue it up for some last questions here, and maybe we'll take them via audio. So if anyone wants to just say question, and then I'll take you off of mute. So we'll kind of change that up right at the end. But, you know, given that today is March 8th, there's so many in-person events as the world reverts back to normal. Of course, we've talked about Golden Packet, which is July 16th. Locally here in the Hudson Valley, we have our monthly gathering that we rotate between parks, with the first one being on the 19th. But a real big capstone event where we're definitely going to be using APRS this year is the Hudson River Radio Relay, which is June 11th, which is only a few weeks before Field Day. So there's lots of really great things going on where if you want to play around with APRS or meet others in person and see what they're doing with it, lots of different ways that we can do this. So it's not just a learn about it on YouTube and spend money and hopefully it works. So, you know, if anyone's looking for more information, all these website links are available.